Alright, here we go. We're going to be doing some a not equal to 1 problems. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So here we've got a 2 in the front. So you can still use our same method with setting up parentheses, but I will tell you you're going to need to do a 2n and an n for this one, and that's going to complicate things a little bit because the 2 could either go here and the 1 could go here, or you might have to switch them around. So it's going to take a little bit more guessing and checking. So there is a little bit more of a direct way to go about doing this. This method here is called the AC method, and what that means is we're going to be using the A term, or the A value, and the C value. We're going to multiply them together, A times C. Okay, so that's how we're going to start. I'll start it over here. So AC, well, A equals 2. Okay, this is A, this is B, and this is C. So A equals 2 and C equals 2. So 2 times 2 equals 4. Okay, so now I need to, like I've been doing, think of all of my numbers that multiply up to get 4. So I could do a 1 and a 4, or I could do a 2 and a 2, right? And then I need those two numbers also to add up to get 5. So this is very similar to what we've been doing so far. So in order to get 5, I need to use my 1 and my 4 because 1 plus 4 is going to equal 5. Okay, and they both need to be positive because I need to get a positive 2 out when I multiply. I'm sorry, a positive 4 out. This is a positive 4 here for A times C. So I'm getting my positive 4 and I'm getting my positive 5 when I add them together. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to rewrite my trinomial, but with 4 terms. Okay, and I'm going to use my 1 with an n and my 4 with an n. I'm picking n because that's my variable here. So look how I'm going to do it. I'm going to put 2n squared, just like it was, but instead of writing 5n, I'm going to split it up into a plus 1n plus 4n. So all I did was kind of break that 5 down into a 1 plus 4. And then I'm going to leave my 2 at the end. So the only thing I've done here is written this part using what I figured out over here. Okay, so I replaced 5n with this. Alright, now we're ready to do something called factoring by grouping. I hope that you've studied this a little bit already in your lessons by the time that you're watching this video. But the plan is that when we factor by grouping, we factor the first 2 terms and then we factor the second 2 terms. So I'm looking for a GCF out of the first 2 terms, and I'm thinking that that's n. These both have an n in common. So I'm going to factor out or pull out or undistribute an n, and on the inside I'm left with 2n plus 1. I can check that. I can multiply this back in and I will get back my original 2n squared plus 1n. Now I'm going to do the second part. I need to think of any common factor here between 4n and 2. I could take out a 2, right? They're both divisible by 2. So I'm going to pull out or undistribute a 2, and I've got left 2n because 2 times 2n is 4n plus 1. 2 times 1 is 2. So if I multiply this back in, I'll get that back. Okay, so I have factored by grouping almost. Look here. I've got a 2n plus 1 and a 2n plus 1, right? So I can factor that out of these 2 bigger terms. So I'm going to pull that 2n plus 1 out, slap it in the front, and write what's left. Okay, so I'm basically pulling these out, putting it into the front, and I've got an n plus 2 left. N plus 2. And that's it. I've factored by grouping, and I've actually factored my original trinomial. This is going to be my final answer here. Okay, I used the AC method to factor that trinomial. Let me multiply them all back together and make sure that it's going to give me back the original. Let's do 2n times n. That's 2n squared. 2n times 2. That's 4n. Notice I'm putting pluses in between everything because everything's positive. 1 times n is a positive n, And a 1 times a 2 is a positive 2. So 2n squared plus 5n plus 2. That was my original trinomial. So it works. We used our AC method. Okay, let's do another one so you can kind of start to get the hang of it. Alright, for this one I've chosen some bigger numbers. That's okay. We're still going to start with finding A times C. Okay, so I'll go ahead and identify my A, B, and C for you. A, B, and C. So if I want to do A times C, that's going to equal 5 for A times 9 for C. That's going to equal 45. Now, I need to keep in mind that this was a positive 5 here, positive 9, so I did get a positive 45. So the numbers that I multiplied up to get 45 have to equal a positive 45. So remember, that's either going to be a positive times a positive or a negative times a negative. That's the only way to get a positive 45 when I multiply. Okay, let's think of all the factors of 45. There's 1 and 45. I always like to start with the ones. Could I do 2? No, because 45 is not even, so I can't divide it by 2. I could do a 3 though. 3 times 15 equals 45. It's not divisible by 4. It is divisible by 5 because 5 times 9 equals 45. And then I could always switch them back around if I wanted. You know, you don't have to write those down. We're really looking here at these three options. Okay? Again, either add them both together to get a they can either both be positive, but notice that we have to get a negative 18 out when we add them together. So I'm really needing them both to be negative. That's the only way this is going to work, to get out a negative 18, right? So which ones, when I add them together, are going to give me a negative 18? And the only ones I'm seeing here are negative 3 and negative 15, because if I add those two numbers together, I do get a negative 18. So I'm going to break this down here into 4 terms. Remember, we're going to be factoring by grouping. I'm going to rewrite 5x squared. I'm going to write those two middle terms, minus 3x minus 15x plus 9. So I broke down my b term into a negative 3 plus a negative 15. Okay, let's go ahead and factor by grouping now. We're going to get our first two terms and our second two terms. Let's factor out something from the first two terms. I see an x is common in those. So if I do x times a 5x, that'll give me my 5x squared. For this part, I've got only minus 3, because x times negative 3 equals negative 3x. Okay, let's do the second part. For the second part, I'm going to factor out a negative with the whatever number I pull out. And these two numbers are both divisible by 3. That's the greatest common factor there. So I'm going to pull out a negative 3, and I'm going to have to be careful while I do that. Okay, negative 3 times whatever this is has to equal negative 15x. So that's a positive 5x. And a negative 3 times whatever this is has to equal positive 9. So it looks to me like that has to be a negative or a minus 3. Because when I multiply this negative 3 in to here, I get a positive 9 back out. Okay, so looky here. This and this are the same term, right? This is good. This is what needs to happen when we factor by grouping. So it needs to happen like this. Because I'm going to pull out that 5x minus 3, slap it in the front, and I'm left with x minus 3. I factored out my 5x minus 3, put it in the front, and I'm left with x minus 3. And this is my final answer. I have factored the original trinomial using the AC method, which is really simply factoring by grouping. I'm going to leave it up to you to check that answer, multiply it back together to get back the original. But I do have one more, so if you still need another example, here it comes. Alright, example number 3. So again, a little bit bigger numbers, that's okay, we can do it. We need to start with finding a times c. I'm doing this method because my a isn't 1 anymore, and the problem is a little more complicated. So I'm going to do a times c over here. Remember, a is 4, b is negative 15, c is negative 25. So since a is 4 and c is negative 25, look how I put my negative in there with my c. I'm getting out a negative 100 when I do a times c. Right, so I need to think of all the factors of 100, but really negative 100. And then my two factors are going to have to add up to get negative 15. That's the goal. Let's think of factors of 100. We've got 1 and 100. That looks kind of like a 100. We've got a 2 and a 50. 3 doesn't go in. 4 does. 4 times 25 equals 100. 5 goes in. 5 times 20. And I think the only other factor we're going to get out of 100 is 10 times 10. Okay, so let's look at all of these, okay? Let's see which ones look like they might give us out a 15, a negative 15 somehow. These two, the first two, 1 and 100, nope, that's not going to do it. That'll give me like a 99 or maybe a 101. These two will give me like a 52 or maybe a 48, depending on if I add or subtract. These two are getting closer because I could get a 21 or a 29 if I add or subtract. But these two right here, this is what's going to do it. 5 and 20, those will give me 15 somehow, right? I have to think about how. And remember that when I multiply them, I do have to get a negative 25, which means one of them has to be a positive, one has to be a negative. Excuse me. And when I add them together, I get a negative 15, right? And so the only way for that to happen is if the 20 is the negative one, because 20 is bigger. So I'm going to go ahead and have a negative 20 and a positive 5. And I'm going to write that over here. It doesn't really matter which order I write it in, remember? I could put a plus 5 here and a minus 20 here. I could have switched them around. It really doesn't matter. Okay, so notice here, first of all, that I've simply split this up. So this second line here is equivalent to the first line. I simply split up the negative 15c into a positive 5c and a negative 20c. So now I'm ready to factor by grouping. I'm going to underline my two sets of terms. And in the first set, the only thing that can come out is a c, right? That's the only part that's common. And I'm left with a 4c plus 5. Remember, multiply it back in. Make sure you get back the original. And in the second two terms, I can take out a 5, but really a negative 5, because see here I've got a negative or a minus sign. I'm going to pull out a negative 5 and see what I've got left. Negative 5 times a positive 4c will give me a negative 20c. And then 25 divided by 5, that's 5. And I need it to be a positive 5 because when I multiply negative 5 times positive 5, that's going to be my negative 25. And voila! I've got my 4c plus 5 and my 4c plus 5, don't I? So I'm going to take that 4c plus 5, the common term, pull it out, slap it in the front, and I'm left with a c minus 5. And that's it. I've done it. I've factored by grouping, and I've actually factored the original trinomial using the AC method. And this is my final answer. And again, I'll leave it up to you to multiply these all back together and see if you get back this original trinomial. Okay? So that's it for factoring. Good luck with this. The only way you're going to get better at it is to practice. Practice, practice, practice when it comes to factoring. You'll get more comfortable with numbers. I promise you're going to get more comfortable with adding and subtracting positive and negative numbers if that's always been a challenge for you. This is a great topic to really get good with numbers. So good luck on it. Let me know how it goes, and let me know if you have any questions at all about this.